Everybody, welcome to Classic Martial Arts this week. We're going to talk about blades this week, what makes them a good blade, a bad blade. We're really going to get into the geometry of the blades for cutting, build upon what works best and why. What's a good cutting blade and what's not. What's a good thrusting blade. Maybe you can understand a little bit better so you can figure out which one is better for a slash, a thrust, a pull, or a push cut. So let's get started. Starting this a little bit different, this is all about blades today, and we're going to talk about each one of these blades because the questions come up, well, what's the best one for cutting? Well, the question becomes, they're all good for cutting. These are all Shashkas, and the challenge is which one fits you the best, and then what technique do you use for cutting? So let's do the first one. If you notice, I'm showing the amount of curve right here on this bottom one. That is a 1838 Shashka, military issue for the Imperial Russian Army. This was the first generation. And if you notice, there's a lot of drop, but there's a lot of curve to this blade, a lot of drop. So this was a what? This blade was made to be a slashing blade for what? Non-armored, right? So non-armored, it's made to slash. Now, as we progress, when we start looking at things, this is right here. This one is a M1881. It's Imperial Russian, okay? And you notice it's what? Very straight in comparison to the 38. You can see it in the scale next to it. All right, so why would we want to use that? Well, that is actually made as a thrusting weapon, and it's a much heavier weapon made for horseback. This one is an interesting blade here. This one I'm showing you here. This is a lower ranks 1904 made in Dagestan, and it was made for the Cossacks. Very interesting blade, very flexible, but it's definitely a slashing blade. It's made to cut. But if you notice the amount of belly, the best way to describe it, that it has compared to, say, an 81, there's a big difference. All right, so let's move here to the Soviet blade. All right, so we're into the Soviet era right there. That is a Soviet M1927. So it gets interesting because you look at that, and it's very similar to the 81, only it's a little bit different, and of course it has the classic hammer and sickle on the handle. Now, we move to here, we get into that next blade. When you look at that, it's called a Gouda blade. And that was a trade blade made and sold during the 1870s to 1880s. And it was actually a European blade that was sold to local smiths. And then they would put handles and scabbards on them. And then behind that, right here, that is a Armenian blade. And it was made in Tbilisi. It was made in about 1877. So it's interesting to look at the amount of curve that it has. Now, when you compare it to the Georgian, and this is a Georgian made in about 1870, 1880, according to the folks I've talked to. It's very similar. Most likely, I think the blade was originally made, it was modeled after the Armenian, but if you look at this, it's a Georgian blade. You can see, multiple furrows, fullers, but you can see it right here. And you can see the handles are made of wood. This one's made of horn. This one here is actually really nice, is the way they did the horn. You can see the different styles. This is actually Circassian walnut. And you look at the different styles, and you can see the handles are a little bit different, and that the shapes of the blades are very different. So the question becomes, what's the sweet spot on it? What's best for cutting? So that's the challenge you have with each different type of blade that you have, is what would be the best. And that gets down to weight and skill. I can say, if I was looking for a good slashing blade to cut things, this 38 right here, M1838, beautiful blade for that. This Dagestan, nice light, fast 04, good cutter right here. This one here, definitely a nice blade. I like its shape. This Armenian blade would be a good cutter right here. Again, these blades were not made to go up against armor. They were made to slash through things. They're all cutting blades. You can definitely see when you get into the Soviet blade and the 81 that it's definitely meant to be a thrusting blade, and it also will cut, but it doesn't have the same amount of belly or curve that you see with other Shashkas. So, things to think about when you buy yourself a Shashka. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to thrust with it? Or is you buying yourself a cutter? Is it a display piece? The question becomes, are you going to use these for cutting? If you're going to cut with a blade, and then say to yourself, well, what are you going to cut? Because some blades are meant to what? Push. Some are meant to pull. And you think about this. Are we going to slice? Or are we going to chop? That's a question you should be asking yourself. All right. So do I want to chop like an axe? Or do I want to just shove the blade and let the blade carry itself in? Or do I want to pull it and slide it through? Because like if you give a backhand cut, think about that. Is it, if you take a backhand cut, we're what? We're cutting and we're pulling through. So we're actually pulling, we're slicing through. Is where if you take a straighter blade, this kind of reminds me of a giant kitchen knife. It's going to do what? It's going to cut as it slides in, but it's like slicing cheese. This and the other one, I'm going to pull this and make this one slice through. So this is all food for thought when you're looking to buy a blade and to use a blade and to understand kind of the history when somebody says, oh, it's a Shashka. Well, what kind of Shashka? As you can see here, and this is only a small sample of the different types of Shashkas that are out there. Another thing interesting to look at is if you look at the tips. And we look here, this is, the 38, and we're here into the 81, the 04, the 27, and then we have here the Gouda blade, the trade blade from the 1880s, and these are all 1880s, but you see the tips are definitely same portions. You can see they're actually designed to be sharpened on the back. All of these have that same feature right here where they're designed to be sharpened on the back for a back cut. If you notice, this one barely has it. This one barely has it here. Same with this one, only a little bit there. Same with this. So it's interesting that these were all meant for a nice back cut. Pick up the wrist. So there's actually a different technique to use these blades than this blade. So each one would come with, then, based upon the mechanical design, something that it did better. What I always say to you guys, спасибо, мои друзья, смотрите my film. Thank you for watching my film. До свидания, на здоровье, goodbye until you. Увидимся только. See you soon. Пока-пока. Bye-bye.